where headless nuns still walk, the most haunted place in the Philippines. Prologue. The building on the hill. There is a place in the Philippines that locals refuse to visit after dark. A crumbling stone building perched atop Dominican Hill overlooking the city of Baguio. Its walls are covered in graffiti. Its windows are empty eye sockets staring down at the city below. Vines crawl across its facade like grasping fingers. The tropical sun beats down on its red-tiled roof, but inside, the air is always cold. This place is called the Diplomat Hotel, and according to thousands of witnesses, it is one of the most haunted locations in the entire Philippines. Visitors report seeing headless figures in white robes walking the corridors. They hear children crying in empty rooms. They feel invisible hands grabbing at them in the darkness. Cameras malfunction. Fullness D. People experience sudden, overwhelming terror that makes them flee the building in panic. Ghost hunting teams have investigated the Diplomat Hotel multiple times. Paranormal investigators have recorded strange voices, captured shadowy figures on camera, and documented electromagnetic anomalies throughout the building. The hotel has been featured on Philippine television programs about the supernatural and has become a pilgrimage site for those seeking encounters with the dead. But the Diplomat Hotel was not always abandoned. It was not always haunted. To understand why spirits walk its halls, we must go back to the beginning. To 1913, when construction began on what was supposed to be a peaceful retreat house for Catholic priests and nuns. To World War II, when this sanctuary became a slaughterhouse. To the decades that followed, when every attempt to use the building ended in tragedy and death. This is the story of the Diplomat Hotel, a story of massacre, torture, suicide, and ghosts that refuse to leave. A story that proves some horrors are so terrible, they echo through time forever. Chapter 1. The Dominican Hill Retreat House, 1913 to 1941. In 1911, American and Spanish friars of the Order of Preachers, commonly known as Dominicans, made plans to build a vacation house in Baguio City. Baguio, located in the mountains of northern Luzon, was known as the summer capital of the Philippines because of its cool climate. While the lowlands sweltered in tropical heat, Baguio's elevation of 1,500 meters above sea level provided relief with temperatures that rarely exceeded 80 degrees Fahrenheit. The Dominicans purchased a 17-hectare hill property from American residents living in Baguio. The hill was beautiful, covered in pine trees, with panoramic views of the city and surrounding mountains. It was perfect for a retreat where priests and nuns could escape the pressures of their ministry, pray, meditate, and rest. The building was designed by Father Roque Ruano, a Dominican priest who was also a talented architect. Father Ruano had previously designed the main building of the University of Santo Tomas in Manila, one of the most impressive structures in the Philippines. For the Baguio Retreat House, he created a design that blended Spanish colonial and neo-Gothic architectural styles. Construction began in 1913. The building was made of stone and reinforced concrete, built to last for centuries. It had multiple levels with spacious rooms, high ceilings, arched doorways, and long corridors. There were courtyards with fountains where priests could walk and contemplate. There was a stone crucifix on the outdoor patio of the second floor, looking out over the city. The retreat house was inaugurated in May 1915. The hill on which it stood was christened Dominican Hill, a name that remains to this day. For a brief period, the Dominicans attempted to use the building as a seminary school, calling it Colegio del Santissimo Rosario. But enrollment was extremely low. There simply weren't enough students interested in joining the priesthood in Baguio. By 1917, just 2 years after opening, the seminary closed. The building reverted to its original purpose as a retreat and vacation house for the Dominican order. For more than 2 decades, from 1917 to 1941, the Dominican Hill Retreat House functioned exactly as intended. Priests and nuns came to rest, to pray, to escape the demands of their work in parishes and schools across the Philippines. It was a place of peace, contemplation, and spiritual renewal. The gardens were beautiful. The air was cool and clean. The view from the hill was spectacular. Mass was celebrated daily in the chapel. The sound of prayers and hymns echoed through the stone corridors. It was a sanctuary, a place removed from the violence and chaos of the world. That peace would not last. Chapter 2. The Japanese Invasion, December 1941. On December 8, 1941, just hours after the attack on Pearl Harbor, Japanese forces invaded the Philippines. The invasion was swift and brutal. Japanese aircraft bombed American military installations across the archipelago. Japanese troops landed at multiple points and began advancing inland. Baguio, with its large United States Army base and the Philippine Military Academy, was one of the first targets. Japanese bombers attacked the city on December 8. Within days, Japanese ground forces arrived and occupied Baguio. As the Japanese advanced, civilians fled in terror. Stories of Japanese brutality had already spread throughout the Philippines. People knew what happened in places the Japanese conquered. Massacres, rape, torture, forced labor. No one wanted to be caught by the invading army. Many of these refugees fled to the Dominican Hill retreat house, believing it would be a safe sanctuary. It was a church property, after all. Surely the Japanese would respect religious neutrality. Surely priests and nuns and the refugees they sheltered would be left alone. The Dominican friars and nuns welcomed the refugees. The retreat house quickly filled with civilians, men, women, children, all seeking protection. The priests and nuns did what they could to provide food, water, and shelter. They prayed for deliverance. They hoped the American forces would retake the Philippines soon and the nightmare would end. But the Americans did not come. Not in weeks. Not in months. By early 1942, American and Filipino forces had been pushed back to the Bataan Peninsula, where they would make their doomed last stand. The Philippines had fallen to Japanese occupation, and the Japanese were coming to Dominican Hill. Chapter 3. The Kempeitai Torture and Massacre. The Japanese military force that arrived at the Dominican Hill retreat house was not a regular army unit. It was the Kempeitai, the Japanese secret military police. The Kempeitai were feared throughout Japanese-occupied territories. They were responsible for maintaining order, rooting out resistance, and punishing anyone suspected of opposing Japanese rule. Their methods were notorious: torture, execution, terror. The Kempeitai answered to no one except the Japanese High Command. They had absolute power over the civilian population. When the Kempeitai arrived at the Dominican Hill retreat house, they found it filled with refugees and staffed by Dominican priests and nuns. The building's strategic location, high on a hill with clear views of Baguio City, made it valuable as a military headquarters. The Kempeitai decided to occupy the retreat house. What happened next is one of the darkest chapters in the history of Baguio City. The Kempeitai did not simply expel the refugees and religious personnel. They turned the retreat house into a prison, a torture center, and a killing ground. Refugees who had sought sanctuary at the retreat house were now prisoners. They were confined to certain areas of the building, guarded by Kempeitai soldiers. Any attempt to leave was met with violence. Then the torture began. Witnesses who survived, and there were very few, described horrors that are difficult to comprehend. The Kempeitai interrogated prisoners, demanding information about American and Filipino guerrilla fighters. Even people who knew nothing were tortured. The Kempeitai believed that pain would produce confession, regardless of whether there was anything to confess. The methods were barbaric. Prisoners were beaten with clubs and rifle butts. They were burned with cigarettes. Their fingernails were pulled out. They were subjected to water torture, held underwater until they nearly drowned, then revived and drowned again. Women were raped, sometimes repeatedly, sometimes in front of their families. Children were not spared. There are accounts of children being tortured to force their parents to talk. The crying of children being hurt was one of the sounds that haunted the retreat house during those terrible years. And then there were the executions. Prisoners deemed useless or dangerous were killed. But the Kempeitai did not use quick methods. Executions were public spectacles designed to terrorize the remaining prisoners into submission. Some prisoners were taken to the courtyard where the fountain once provided a peaceful backdrop for prayer. They were tied to trees. Then they were stabbed, repeatedly, slowly, while other prisoners were forced to watch. The executioners would stab non-vital areas first, arms, legs, stomach, making the victim suffer for as long as possible before delivering the killing blow. Other prisoners were shot, but again, not quickly. The Kempeitai would shoot prisoners in the legs or abdomen, causing painful wounds that took hours or days to kill. The screaming could be heard throughout the building and down the hill into the city. And then there were the beheadings. Chapter 4. The Headless Nuns and Priests. The most infamous atrocity committed at the Dominican Hill Retreat House was the beheading of priests and nuns. The exact number is unknown. Records from this period are fragmentary and unreliable, but multiple sources confirm that Japanese soldiers executed several Catholic priests and nuns by beheading them with swords. Why were religious personnel targeted? The reasons varied. Some may have been suspected of helping Filipino resistance fighters. Others may have simply been killed to terrorize the remaining refugees. In the paranoid, violent atmosphere of Japanese occupation, any perceived slight or suspicion could result in death. The beheadings were carried out with Japanese katana swords. The executioners were Kempeitai officers or soldiers skilled in swordsmanship. In Japanese military culture, beheading was considered an honorable form of execution, quick, clean, requiring skill and precision. But that did not make it any less horrific for the victims and witnesses. Priests and nuns were forced to kneel. Their hands were bound behind their backs. A Kempeitai officer would raise his sword, position the blade against the victim's neck, and strike. If the executioner was skilled, one blow would sever the head completely. If not, multiple strokes were needed, and the victim suffered terribly. The bodies were often left where they fell, as a warning to others. The heads were sometimes displayed. This was psychological warfare, break the spirit of resistance by showing that not even religious figures would be spared. One particularly horrific account describes nuns being forced to watch as priests were beheaded, then the nuns themselves being executed in the same manner. The trauma of watching friends and colleagues die in such a brutal way, knowing you would be next, is almost unimaginable. These executions happened not once but multiple times during the Japanese occupation. Every time the Kempeitai decided someone needed to be made an example of, the swords came out. After the war, when the retreat house was being cleared and repaired, workers found skulls and bones near the fountain in the courtyard. These were the remains of execution victims, left where they had been killed. Today, when visitors to the Diplomat Hotel report seeing headless figures in white robes walking the corridors, they are seeing the ghosts of priests and nuns who died in this manner, still wearing their religious vestments, still walking the halls they once walked in life, but now missing their heads, severed by Japanese swords over 80 years ago. Chapter 5. The Comfort Station. The horrors at the Dominican Hill Retreat House were not limited to torture and execution. The Kempeitai also used the building as a comfort station, a euphemism for a facility where women were held as sex slaves for Japanese soldiers. This aspect of the retreat house's wartime history is less well documented than the executions, partly because survivors of sexual violence were often too traumatized to speak about their experiences, and partly because of the deep shame and stigma associated with rape in Filipino culture. But enough evidence exists to confirm that women were held at the retreat house and systematically raped by Kempeitai personnel. These women were not volunteers. They were prisoners forced into sexual slavery. Some may have been captured Filipino civilians. Others may have been women from elsewhere in Asia, Korea, China, Indonesia, trafficked to the Philippines to serve Japanese military personnel. The women were held in specific rooms in the building. Japanese soldiers and officers would visit these rooms to rape them. The women had no choice, no escape. Refusal meant torture or death. Some women who became pregnant were killed. Others died from disease, malnutrition, or injuries sustained during repeated rapes. When the war ended and American forces liberated Baguio, some of these women survived. But their ordeal left them physically and psychologically destroyed. Many never spoke about what happened to them. They tried to rebuild their lives as best they could, but the trauma never left them. Today, some of the paranormal phenomena reported at the Diplomat Hotel may be connected to these women. Visitors describe hearing women crying, screaming, or moaning. They feel presences in certain rooms that make them deeply uncomfortable. Some visitors, particularly women, report feeling overwhelming sadness or terror in specific areas of the building, as if the suffering that occurred there has left an imprint on the place itself. Chapter 6. The Battle of Baguio and Mass Suicide, April 1945. By early 1945, American forces had returned to the Philippines. General Douglas MacArthur had famously promised, "I shall return," when forced to evacuate in 1942. Now he was making good on that promise. In February 1945, American forces launched an offensive to retake Baguio City. The Battle of Baguio lasted from February to April 1945. It was brutal urban combat, with Japanese forces defending every building, every street. The Kempeitai occupying the Dominican Hill retreat house knew the battle was lost. American forces were closing in. Capture was inevitable. In Japanese military culture, surrender was considered deeply shameful. Soldiers were taught that death was preferable to the dishonor of being captured alive. Japanese propaganda had also convinced many soldiers that if captured, Americans would torture and kill them. Rather than surrender, the Kempeitai at the retreat house chose suicide. On April 26, 1945, as American forces approached Dominican Hill, the Japanese defenders made their final stand. When it became clear the position could not be held, they committed harakiri, ritual suicide by disembowelment. Harakiri, also called seppuku, involves using a short blade to cut open one's own abdomen. It is an agonizing death, but in Japanese warrior culture, it was considered an honorable way to die. Often, a second person would stand behind the suicide victim and behead them after the abdominal cut, to spare them prolonged suffering. But at the retreat house, many Kempeitai died slowly, bleeding out from self-inflicted wounds. American forces arriving at the retreat house found the bodies. Dozens of Japanese soldiers and Kempeitai officers lying in pools of blood, their own swords beside them. Some had died quickly. Others had suffered for hours before bleeding to death. The Americans also found evidence of the massacres that had occurred over the previous 3 years. Skeletal remains, torture implements, blood stains on walls and floors that would never completely wash away. And they found a few survivors. Refugees who had somehow managed to stay alive through years of captivity, starvation, disease, and violence. The Dominican Hill retreat house was finally liberated. But it would never be the same. The building had seen too much death, too much suffering. The stones themselves seemed stained with violence. Chapter 7. Restoration and the Diplomat Hotel, 1947 to 1987. After the war ended, the Dominican Order assessed the damage to their retreat house. The building had been bombed during the Battle of Baguio. American forces had targeted it because it was a Japanese stronghold, and part of the right wing had been destroyed. The interior was heavily damaged. Blood and filth covered the floors. The building reeked of death. From 1945 to 1947, the Dominicans undertook extensive restoration work. They repaired the structural damage from bombing. They cleaned and repainted the interior. They tried to make the retreat house usable again. The Dominicans reoccupied the building and attempted to use it for its original purpose. But it was difficult. The memories of what had happened there were too fresh. Every room, every corridor held echoes of screams and violence. Some of the priests and nuns who returned reported feeling deeply uncomfortable in the building, as if unseen eyes were watching them. There were also practical problems. The building had been severely damaged. Repairs were expensive and ongoing, and Baguio itself had changed. The peaceful mountain city of the pre-war era was gone, replaced by a larger, busier urban center. By the early 1970s, the Dominicans decided to sell the property. In 1973, a company called Diplomat Hotels Incorporated purchased the retreat house with plans to convert it into a luxury hotel. The new owner was Antonio Agapito Tony Agpeo, a local businessman and entrepreneur. Agpeo was a controversial figure. He claimed to be a psychic surgeon and faith healer, performing operations by reaching into patients' bodies with his bare hands to remove tumors and diseased tissue without making incisions. Skeptics dismissed him as a fraud and charlatan. Believers credited him with miraculous healings. Regardless of his reputation in faith healing, Agpeo had money and ambition. He saw the former retreat house as an opportunity to create something spectacular. The location was perfect, high on a hill with amazing views, close to downtown Baguio but removed from the noise and crowds. The building itself was beautiful, with its stone walls and Spanish colonial architecture. Agpeo invested heavily in remodeling the interior. He preserved the building's unique architectural features but modernized the facilities. He installed bathrooms, upgraded electrical and plumbing systems, furnished rooms with high-quality furniture and decorations. The result was a 33-bedroom luxury hotel unlike any other in Baguio. The Diplomat Hotel opened for business in the mid-1970s. It quickly became popular with wealthy tourists and businesspeople visiting Baguio. The rooms were spacious and well-appointed. The views were spectacular. The hotel offered a unique combination of historical architecture and modern amenities. But from the beginning, there were problems. Staff members reported strange occurrences. Doors would open and close by themselves. Lights would flicker or turn on and off without anyone touching the switches. Objects would move from where they had been placed. Guests complained of hearing strange noises at night, crying, screaming, footsteps in empty corridors. Some guests reported seeing figures in white robes walking the halls late at night. When approached, these figures would disappear. Others described waking up in the middle of the night feeling that someone was watching them, only to see shadowy shapes standing at the foot of their bed before vanishing. The hotel's reputation began to suffer. Word spread that the Diplomat Hotel was haunted. Some guests specifically requested rooms where paranormal activity had been reported, treating it as a thrill. But many others refused to stay there. Bookings declined. Then, on a night in 1987, Tony Agpeo suffered a massive heart attack while at the hotel. He died there, in the building he had tried to transform into a luxury destination. With Agpeo's death, the Diplomat Hotel lost its driving force. There were financial problems, debts, legal disputes over ownership, maintenance costs that couldn't be met with declining revenues. By the late 1980s, the hotel had ceased operations. The building was abandoned once again. Chapter 8. Abandonment and Decay, 1987 to present. After the Diplomat Hotel closed in the late 1980s, the building stood empty. Without maintenance, it began to deteriorate rapidly. Tropical rains leaked through damaged roofing. Vines and vegetation grew over the exterior. Windows were broken. The interior was looted. Anything valuable or portable was stolen by vandals. In 1990, a magnitude 7.7 earthquake struck northern Luzon. Baguio was severely damaged, with hundreds of buildings collapsing. The Diplomat Hotel survived the earthquake, testament to its solid construction, but it sustained additional damage. Cracks appeared in walls. Parts of the structure became unstable. The building was now officially dangerous. The local government considered demolishing it entirely. But the Diplomat Hotel had become part of Baguio's identity, a landmark, however dark its history. Instead of demolition, the city decided to preserve it. In 2005, the city of Baguio acquired ownership of the property. It was renamed Dominican Heritage Hill and Nature Park. In 2014, the National Historical Commission of the Philippines declared it a National Historical Site, recognizing its significance to Philippine history. But preservation efforts moved slowly. The building remained largely abandoned, deteriorating year by year. It became a magnet for urban explorers, ghost hunters, and thrill seekers. Visitors would climb the hill, enter through broken doors and windows, and explore the ruins. They spray-painted graffiti on the walls. They took photographs and videos to post on social media. And many of them experienced things they could not explain. The Diplomat Hotel's reputation as one of the most haunted places in the Philippines grew stronger. Television shows about the paranormal investigated the site. Ghost Hunters International, a popular American paranormal investigation program, visited the hotel and recorded what they claimed were authentic paranormal phenomena. Filipino television programs including Magandang Gabi, Bayan, Good Evening, Nation, AHA, and Kapuso Mo, Jessica Soho, You Have a Friend in Jessica Soho, all featured Halloween specials filmed at the Diplomat Hotel, interviewing witnesses and conducting overnight investigations. Every investigation reported the same basic findings: unexplained voices, apparitions, electromagnetic anomalies, sudden temperature drops, equipment malfunctions, and an overwhelming sense of presence, as if the building were filled with unseen watchers. By the 2010s, the Diplomat Hotel had become one of the most popular tourist attractions in Baguio, though not in the way anyone originally intended. Thousands of visitors came not to stay in a luxury hotel, but to experience its dark history and possibly encounter its ghosts. In 2022, the local government finally secured funding for proper restoration and preservation. 15 million Philippine pesos, approximately $300,000, was granted by the National Commission for Culture and the Arts. Work began to stabilize the structure, repair damage, and create safe viewing areas for visitors. Today, the building is officially known as Baguio City Heritage Hill and Nature Park. But everyone still calls it the Diplomat Hotel. And the ghosts, it seems, have not left. Chapter 9. The Hauntings. What people experience. Thousands of people have visited the Diplomat Hotel over the past few decades, and hundreds of them report experiencing paranormal phenomena. The reports are remarkably consistent, with the same types of encounters described by independent witnesses who have never spoken to each other. The headless apparitions. The most frequently reported phenomenon is seeing headless figures in white robes. These apparitions are believed to be the spirits of the priests and nuns who were beheaded by the Kempeitai during World War II. Witnesses describe seeing a figure in white walking down a corridor or standing in a room. The figure is human-shaped, with arms and legs visible beneath flowing white garments. But where the head should be, there is nothing, just empty space above the shoulders. Some witnesses see these figures for just a few seconds before they vanish. Others watch them walk the length of a corridor before disappearing around a corner or through a wall. A few brave or foolish individuals have tried to approach these apparitions, but as they get closer, the figures fade away like smoke. One visitor described following a headless nun through several rooms. I could see her clearly. She was wearing a white habit like nuns wear, but from the neck up, there was just nothing. She walked slowly, like she was looking for something. I followed her for maybe a minute. Then she walked through a wall and disappeared. Children crying. Another common report is hearing children crying. This is particularly disturbing because it's well documented that children were among the victims of the Kempeitai's brutality at the retreat house. The crying is described as coming from empty rooms or from outdoors near the building. It sounds like multiple children, not just one. The crying is desperate, heartbroken, the sound of children in pain or terror. When witnesses investigate the source of the crying, they find no children. The sound stops abruptly when approached, or it seems to move further away, always staying just out of sight. One woman visiting the hotel with friends reported, "We heard a baby crying. It was so clear, I was sure there was a baby somewhere in the building. We searched everywhere. The crying kept moving. We'd think it was coming from one room, but when we got there, it would start coming from somewhere else. Finally, it just stopped. There was no baby, but I know what I heard. Screaming and moaning. Many visitors report hearing screaming, horrible, agonized screaming as if someone is being tortured. These screams are often described as coming from the courtyard area where prisoners were executed during the war. The screaming is sometimes accompanied by moaning or crying. Witnesses describe it as sounding like many people suffering simultaneously, a chorus of pain and despair. The sounds are brief, usually lasting just a few seconds or minutes, but they are intense enough that they cause many visitors to flee the building in panic. Physical sensations. Some visitors report being touched by invisible hands. They feel grabbing at their arms or shoulders. They feel tugging on their clothing. Some report feeling breath on the back of their neck or hearing whispered voices too faint to understand. The atmosphere in certain parts of the building is described as oppressive and threatening. Visitors report sudden feelings of overwhelming dread, as if something terrible is about to happen. Some experience difficulty breathing, feeling like the air is being pressed out of their lungs. Temperature anomalies are common. Visitors walk through cold spots, areas where the temperature is noticeably colder than the surroundings. These cold spots don't correspond to drafts or ventilation. They're concentrated in specific locations and disappear when the visitor moves a few steps away. Equipment malfunctions. Electronic devices frequently malfunction at the Diplomat Hotel. Cameras stop working or produce strange artifacts in photographs. Mysterious orbs, shadowy figures, or blurred areas where nothing should be. Phone batteries drain rapidly, going from full charge to dead in minutes. Flashlights flicker or go out completely, even with fresh batteries. One photographer who visited the hotel reported, "I brought 3 cameras, all fully charged. Within 20 minutes, all 3 were dead. Batteries completely drained. I've never had that happen before, and when I charged them later, they worked fine. It was only at the hotel that they died." Chapter 10. The most terrifying accounts. Among the hundreds of paranormal reports from the Diplomat Hotel, some stand out as particularly terrifying. The aggressive spirit. A group of young men visited the hotel late one night, planning to spend several hours there as a dare. They brought beer, cameras, and flashlights. They were joking and laughing, treating the whole thing as an adventure. In one of the upper rooms, the atmosphere suddenly changed. The temperature dropped dramatically. Their laughter stopped. One of the young men later described what happened. "We all felt it at the same time, like something really angry was there with us. I've never been so scared in my life. Then one of my friends was pushed hard. He flew backward and hit the wall. There was no one near him, nothing that could have pushed him, but he had this huge bruise on his chest afterward, like someone had shoved him with both hands. We ran out of there and we never went back." The woman in white. A couple visiting Baguio decided to explore the Diplomat Hotel despite warnings from locals. They arrived in the late afternoon, planning to leave before dark. As they were leaving, the woman looked back at the building and saw a figure standing at a second-floor window. It was a woman in a white dress, with long black hair covering her face. The woman was staring down at them. The visitor waved, thinking it was another tourist. The figure didn't move. Then, as they watched, the woman began descending but not using stairs. She floated down the outside of the building, her feet not touching the ground, still staring at them. The couple ran to their car and drove away. The woman later said, "I will never forget that face. Or rather, I'll never forget that I couldn't see her face. Her hair was covering it completely, but I could feel her staring at me. I still have nightmares about it." Locked inside. A solo explorer visited the hotel in the early evening. He was experienced with urban exploration and paranormal investigation. He brought a camera, a voice recorder, and a flashlight. He was exploring the second floor when he heard a door slam shut behind him. He turned around and found that the door he had just walked through was now closed. He tried to open it. It wouldn't budge. It felt like someone was holding it shut from the other side. He could hear footsteps in the corridor beyond the door. Heavy boots, walking slowly back and forth. He called out, asking if anyone was there. The footsteps stopped. Then he heard what sounded like many people whispering all at once, in a language he didn't understand. He found another exit and got out of the building. He later checked his voice recorder. It had captured the whispering. Audio analysis suggested multiple voices speaking simultaneously, but the language couldn't be identified. Some researchers who listened to the recording later suggested it might be Japanese. Epilogue. The ghosts that will not leave. Today, the Diplomat Hotel stands as a monument to human cruelty and the suffering of innocents. The local government has worked to preserve it as a historical site, a reminder of the atrocities committed during World War II. Educational plaques have been installed, explaining the building's history. Guided tours are available during daylight hours, but the ghosts remain. No amount of historical preservation, no educational plaques, no restoration work has made the spirits leave. The headless nuns and priests still walk the corridors. The children still cry in empty rooms. The screams of torture victims still echo in the courtyard. Perhaps the ghosts remain because their deaths were so violent and unjust. Perhaps they stay because their suffering was so terrible that it imprinted itself on the building itself, creating a kind of psychic recording that plays on an endless loop. Or perhaps they remain to bear witness, to ensure that what happened at the Dominican Hill Retreat House is not forgotten. To remind us that behind every historical statistic, every casualty number, every mention of wartime atrocities, there were real people who suffered and died. The priests and nuns who were beheaded had names. The refugees who were tortured and killed had families. The women who were raped had dreams and hopes. The children who cried in terror before dying deserved to be remembered. The ghosts of the Diplomat Hotel refused to be forgotten. And perhaps that is exactly as it should be. If you visit Baguio City, you can go to the Diplomat Hotel. You can walk through its crumbling corridors. You can stand in the courtyard where prisoners were executed. You can look out from the stone crucifix on the second-floor patio and see the spectacular view of the city below. You may see nothing unusual. You may experience nothing paranormal. The ghosts don't appear for everyone. But even if you don't see or hear anything supernatural, you will feel it. You will feel the weight of history in that place. You will sense the suffering that occurred there. You will understand, in a way that history books cannot convey, the human cost of war and occupation and hatred. And if you do see something, if you catch a glimpse of a headless figure in white, if you hear children crying in an empty room, if you feel invisible hands touching you in the darkness, remember that you are experiencing echoes of real suffering, real death, real horror. The Diplomat Hotel is haunted, not by fictional monsters or imaginary spirits, but by the ghosts of people who died in terrible ways and whose stories deserve to be told. This is their story. This is why they remain. May their suffering never be forgotten, and may we learn from their tragedy, so that such horrors are never repeated.